Just to Yanni's point, no, it's good news.
No. Okay. Just email him through. Email it through. Okay, so we're now moving to item 13, which is the COVID lockdown community organisation status report. So Marianne's here, and just remind councillors that there are two parts to this report. We have the public report here. There's also some more sensitive material that are from the actual community organisations themselves. It's in PX. If people would like to discuss those things, let me know ahead of time. No one did an informal this morning, but if you'd like to discuss those, let me know and we can move into PX to do that. But otherwise, if we could just keep the discussion at a more general nature, that would be really useful. Thank you. Welcome. And I see we've got people up here as well.
We do indeed. I'll just introduce, down the bottom there, we have Mark Hudson joining us today from the Community Focus Trust. They're based in Springfield Road and provide a range of services to the kind of St Albans and surrounding areas. And then I'm sure a number of you will know Jono Campbell. Give us a wave, Jono.
Kia ora, Jono.
So Jono is from Te Oroho Otatahi, and he's going to talk a wee bit today about the impact that the lockdown and the ongoing restrictions are having on young people that they work with. So before I hand it over to him, it's really about hearing from them today. But just in terms of the report, I'm happy to take it as read, and I'll just highlight a couple of things. It's important to note that it was a snapshot in time that this report was done, and it was actually quite early on in the lockdown. So things did progress as that changed. The general feeling that we got coming through from groups was that people were coping a lot better than the first lockdown. Groups were much more prepared and had developed good systems and processes to enable them to continue to provide varying degrees of support to their communities. Some organisations like Mark's have developed emergency response plans which they were able to activate. And luckily for us, kind of level 4 and level 3 lockdown didn't last that long, so we were pretty lucky in Christchurch. But as level 3s continued, and now with the new traffic light system coming in, we are hearing from groups more recently that there's quite a high level of concern about the vaccine mandate and what that's going to mean for their organisations. Some groups are sort of starting to say, does that mean that possibly we're going to have to exclude people from accessing our services and coming along to our activities? And of course, because a lot of them are working with, vulnerable people in our community, that they're quite concerned about having to possibly turn people away. So really, I'll hand it over in a minute, but we do tend to hear a lot in the media about how tough it's been for the business community. But I think it's really important to note that our voluntary and not-for-profit sector are facing quite a few challenges as well. So I'll get Mark and Jono just to talk a wee bit about what their organisations did during the lockdown and what they're kind of hearing and feeling from the community at the moment. So, Mark.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Mark Hudson, the Trust Manager here at Community Focus Trust based in St Albans. And obviously, the major impact that we had, obviously beginning last year with the pandemic, was all our services were shut down, but as an essential service, we basically kicked into gear and rallied around and just got feedback from other community organisations we're working with in the community, not just in St Albans, but around the city, and how we can develop a plan of action to provide fresh kai into the community. So that started off, and we were supporting 5 other community organisations. Totaho was one of them, and Shooter Community Trust, Nova Trust, and a couple of others. So it was sort of, we sort of led that, and we were providing fresh produce boxes into the community. Per week we were doing anything between 120 to 150 different boxes throughout the city. And that's continued obviously with the MSD response grant that we got, which continues till June next year. So we've sort of been busy. It has been, we're a small team, myself full-time, and we've just brought on a part-time but during the pandemic, especially last year, it was just myself full time. So I was getting a wee bit tired at the end of it. But certainly, we had to do something. So that was our response. And going forward, we certainly have, talking with the community groups we're still connected with. There has been that, I suppose, that anxiety is now in the community. They're seeing people fearful going out. They may have not potentially lost any income or benefits, but certainly that especially when Delta hit, there was another huge increase we found, and that was more around just what was going about the fears and anxiety, depression. So we're helping those groups through food, obviously, and we're obviously in this for the 2-year plan through MSD. We obviously developed a disaster relief plan through that, and we were able to operate through level 4 and level 3 and even level 2. And our sort of mandate and our mana is we don't leave anyone out, and certainly, obviously, as Mary Ann's discussed with the green the traffic light systems, that's certainly we've got a number of vulnerable people in our community that we deal with, and also even some of our volunteers we're just talking with at the moment about vaccines and their fears around the mandates. We at heart, we are, our tagline for our trust is focusing on the needs, and we certainly stand by that. And so it's certainly it's what we've found is that working with these other community organisations, we've helped them connect with their communities. We are based in St Albans, and there's not much of a need for food assistance, but we still see that come through. But we're really enabling other community groups to reach out to their communities, supporting in the way, especially the food response. And so it was certainly, it has changed our focus and our operations, what we've been doing the last year and a half, and especially around events. We do also events, but which of course have been put on hold because of the traffic light system. So and that's, we do that because of we know that people in the community want connection as well. So so that's sort of in a nutshell what we've been doing. And we're continuing obviously with the produce boxes and the essential food boxes, and that hasn't really stopped. So on average, we're doing just under 100 a week throughout St Albans, Papanui Innes ward, and also as referrals come through to others in the city.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, Jono.
Oh, kia ora. I just want to acknowledge Mary Ann. Thank you for the submission. It's really well written and captures stuff nice. And also too, just want to acknowledge Mark and the work that his team did was fantastic over lockdown. We really appreciated this, how quickly they moved and made stuff available. Also too, just want to acknowledge council staff, councillors. We thought after the earthquakes, well, we never knew how to. We didn't have the blueprint on how to manage through an earthquake, through emergency, and now pandemics. We're sort of having to rewrite the blueprint all over again, and just sort of, it's been a tremendously trying time for everybody. So, and it's just in the middle of the stuff, it's really easy. We can see the fear and anxiety that sits in our community, and just how easy it is to turn on one another when people are in times of stress. Yes, through the second round of lockdown, key learnings for as an organisation, as a community, kind of work, that actually what worked the first time worked the second one, and is actually people who are connected actually do much better. People who are disconnected struggle. We saw again people who are well engaged within community. We liken it to the trampoline analogy. Those who've got a lot of springs surrounding them, they've got more bounce and resilience. Those who don't, they quickly retreat into those times of panic, stress, and that comes out in various shapes or forms. I think this time around too, sort of key learnings is just the ability to move into the online world. One of the interesting things is, particularly for a lot of rangatahi, was particularly males disappear into the world of gaming, and they don't do school, and that has a sort of ongoing impact. And I think too, we're just sort of kind of really seeing now and understanding what that potential impact could be moving forward or thinking forward. there's some sort of real, I guess, questions to be answered and challenges in that space, particularly as we've got year 13 students who next year could be facing their third year of NCA disrupted learning, as we expect to see sort of schools having to deal with the issues of going back into online learning at various stages over the year. Probably key for us this time around, we saw was, again, the same old learnings. It's not a sprint. There's times you have to sprint, but you've got to have those times to pause and reflect, and we encourage our community to do that the same. Probably the biggest challenge around that has just been the not knowing this time, and that's really impacted. What does Delta mean? What does it impact? What does it look like? And kind of understanding that you've got to hold that space really lightly, and that hasn't been easy for within our community, where people don't know what they're doing sort of on a daily basis, where they might be living. A good example of that is what we're seeing is currently in emergency housing. We've got a lot of families there who just haven't been vaccinated, and actually we're now finding cases of families who are actually being removed from emergency housing because they're not vaccinated, but there's been no compassion or process of supporting to be vaccination or get vaccinated. And then that's actually just, I guess, making them double down on their resistance to any form, to government authority mandates. They just lump it all into one basket. Yet they're not actually anti-vax. They're just kind of people who are in highly stressed positions. In one case with a young family, with a young baby, now having to find before Christmas further accommodation. The other bit too, just really aware of seeing come out of this is, and Marianne alluded to it, is just a bit like we saw after the earthquakes. It's just that compassion fatigue that sits in the NGO sector. Trying to navigate the compliance aspects of this is really hard. You're trying to navigate it personally, you're trying to navigate it for within your organisation, but I think the key thing is you're also trying to navigate it on behalf of community, particularly where community members don't have that understanding. We're really blessed in terms of we do have a high level of information sharing, particularly over, I notice, in the Northwest, where people share resources and learning and knowledge freely, and you've just got to do that. But it's time and energy that goes into that that's never resourced or, I guess, accounted for, because you're still expected to do your work, and that work is probably higher in terms of, in terms of what's actually on front or the what's on top stuff that you have to deal with on a daily basis. Primarily because people can't think forward, and they're not shifting forward because we don't know what next week looks like or next year looks, so if we don't know what next week looks like, we're not likely to think about next year. Just probably the other, sort of touched on it just really briefly. One of the, we are really kind of cognizant of is that we've seen a number of young people not going back into education or not fully engaging in education. For example, we're taking a group of kids, hopefully we want to take them up to Abel Tasman. These kids have never been there, take them on a tramp next week, but already those are sort of a working age, they're being put into work, and while that's a great thing, the reasons for them being put into work is because of the families are just struggling financially. They need those young people to be working, and there's a high possibility that some of these young people will not be returning to school. We're seeing young people stopping or dropping out of doing NCA because, again, they're not quite sure that they've had 2 years now of disrupted, or a whole year of disrupted learning. And again, the likelihood is that will happen next year. And that's been, I guess, one of our key drivers in terms of having engagement or conversation with community around how do we support that? How do we support our young people to consider vaccination? What's some of the myths, the stuff that sits out there? And that's just not an issue that's particular to us. That's an issue that we're having right across the whole city. We hear from other sectors or other groups as well. Again, probably a little bit of a concern is that we're all having a conversation at different levels of time. So it's, how do we sort of catch up and try and get onto the same page?
Thanks, Jono. So I guess we're happy to take some questions. And I think, here we've got just 2 examples of the amazing organisations that we have in the city that, over the last 11 years have had to step up time and time again. And I think part of the reason that people coped a bit better was because they knew they weren't just going to be abandoned, and that the organisations that support them were still going to be there checking in on them, and they were still going to be able to access the support they needed. So I take my hat off to them. They're amazing people.
Kia ora. Thanks so much. Do we have questions from councillors? Sam and then Jimmy.
Hey, yeah, thanks, Jono, for that. That was, and both of you as well, including you, Mark. That was really useful. Can you just, Jono, run me through, just really briefly, the emergency housing situation you talked about? So, am I right in, are we saying that they weren't encouraged to get vaccinated and now they're sort of resisting it and as a result they're being booted? Can you just, I've probably misinterpreted it, but can you run me through that again?
Yeah, so we were a number of young people either transitioning out of childhood and family care or OT care into independence, or through our whānau work a lot within the community, obviously through the area you know well, Sam, who have been in emergency accommodation in the northwest. Yeah, so we know now again, so that they were in private accommodation, but it was emergency accommodation where actually the owner said, if you're not vaccinated, you need to leave. The challenge for us is, again, I kind of think is that there's no process that sort of happened around that, or sort of the direction to homeowners around, well, how do we do this process well? And we're probably finding at the moment, they're not necessarily the most resistant, but our largest group of, we call them the crowbar whānau. They're the ones we have to sort of crowbar out of within the community to support them to become vaccinated. It's kind of a really long, a slow process, because they're just, where their heads are at and where their minds are at, some of them hadn't even thought about vaccination, because they're just not in that space. And again, that's really concerning, that the message, the media, all those key messages are not actually getting through, which again is understandable when you're sort of, survival on a daily basis is your number one goal.
I guess just a really quick follow-up, is there anything we could be doing, because that quite concerns me in a way that, or is there anything the DHB could be doing to kind of work in a constructive way to resolve it? So not necessarily about what's happened, but how do we move forward now so that these people are as protected as everyone else?
Yeah, I think just making sure that message, it's sort of particularly with these ones, is an understanding that a letter or a single sort of quite a direct message just doesn't work. It's got to be a person-based approach in terms of breaking it down, understanding what's the fear, what's happening, what do they know, what do they don't know, which is a lot more time-consuming, I guess, and that's probably where the challenge sits. But that, I guess, where that engagement within the organisation, who do they know, who do they trust, who can they go for information? I think getting that message really clear, because the other side of it is we do know we have those guys, they get impacted health-wise. The cost of the health system will be, is huge, and we just want to avoid that. And the other thing too is obviously the ongoing long-term effects that, potentially come out of these guys who are already, we're trying to shift out of being reliant on sort of our key sort of systems, the health system, the benefit system.
No, that's useful, because the challenge we're going to have, particularly in your area, is some of our big council facilities, back onto a lot of that. So, maybe it's something, Miriam, we could just take offline in terms of, the people paying the bill for the emergency housing to these private landowners should take an element of responsibility in how they facilitate that, because it will come back to bite us all, I think. So, yeah, thank you very much. That's really useful.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly, thank you so much, particularly with review and based on presentation. 1.3.3, fantastic, you've done a great job. But I'm concerned because this community is the diverse, inclusive community. In the geographic area, I'm not sure community organization, whether you are working together with local community board and the resident association or the neighborhood support, etc., working together, provide this the kind of service. But regarding the demographic area, whether you have engaged with a different ethnic group or informed group, etc., how to working together, then can to integrate all those resources, can provide a good quality service to all those suffering people.
Okay, so I'm not quite sure who wants to answer that one.
Well, I suppose on our front, obviously, for us it was we were heavily focused on collaboration. So obviously talking with the Papua Innis board, but also we're part of the Northwest Collective, which obviously Te Aroha part of, and Neighbour Trust. So we were talking with them and basically saying how can we basically help, and obviously within their own communities they have their own obviously ethnic groups, and so we were sort of talking with them saying, well, what can we provide that helps them do their job, connecting with their own community. So we were certainly heavily talking with our own advisors. They were in touch. We were obviously part of the civil defence group as well, just collaboration to talk, to make sure that no one in the community is left out regarding whether it's food or someone to talk to. So although we were focused more on the food relief and the food response, we were certainly aware of making sure that the groups that we were dealing with, how could we assist with, whether it's talking with our local board, our community board, advisors again, to make sure that, especially in St Albans, where there is a wide demographics and sort of, we sort of, in the reporting that we've done through MSD and the reporting that has come back through the organisations that report back to us regarding the food relief, it's as a wide range of ethnic groups that that have asked for help and have obviously benefited through the COVID response that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Quick one from me. You guys do and those within your organisation do a lot of work with a lot of people who need help. But past experience has shown us that those people working in NGOs like yours also need support and suffer burnout through these times. How are your actual organisations themselves and the people that work within them and the volunteers all coping with what's happening and the amount of work that you now have?
Jono, do you want to answer that, or do you want
as I mentioned before, you get the sense there's a bit of compassion fatigue, and everyone's sort of kind of holding out for Christmas, but also knowing that Christmas is not kind of what you kind of hoped it would be, because there's still a few unknowns around there. Really picking that up. I think the hardest thing around this time around is just the compliance that's kind of sat around trying to interpret stuff and acknowledging that there's a real responsibility on that compliance space in terms of as employers. And the key question, and Mark touched it before, how do you get, our call is to sort of work with those, vulnerable, marginalised, and our experiences that often we've seen in times of crisis, the paid professionals can pull out, but that's actually really unhealthy for communities because we've sort of seen that time and time again. And when I say paid professionals, if it's a safety issue to say, we need to stop, compliance takes over and sometimes people get left behind. I think the key challenge is that where people's energy is being soaked up. How do we do that? How do we maintain, because there's now a real personal health element too. We have a lot of our volunteers will be health compromised. We have a lot of ones who sit either elderly or home who work within the community. I think that's some of the real impact we still haven't sort of thought about or impact across the community. We're going into homes where we know there'll be unvaccinated people, and you just have to do that. Because kind of sending compromised people to sort of work with compromised people, and as an employer, there's so much responsibility that sort of sits in that. Your wisdom is being tested, I think, on a daily basis, and that's not even necessarily looking a long way forward. And it's not something you can legislate for or be really prescriptive in as well. I think that's the really hard thing too, because you're dealing again with vulnerable people in really hard spaces.
That's great. Thank you so much. Aaron's got a question now.
Yeah, Jono, thank you very much for raising the crowbar communities. I think that's what you referred to them as. If the question had been asked of you at the start of this year, prior to the rollout, who we needed to talk to, how we were going to deal with them, I'm picking you would have said exactly what you said today, except it's almost too late because we go to a traffic light system next week, and some of these people haven't, like you said, haven't even considered going out to do it. Too often, people who are not getting vaccinated are being called anti-vaxxers. You haven't used that term today at all because you see it through a completely different lens. Is there a better way to communicate? Because it's not a DHB thing. We raised this back in April. We said we could have named all the groups to talk to early, but it was run out of Wellington. Is there a message we can send to them on how to communicate with those groups and maybe label them a little less and work with them to get over the line to get the support they need.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, actually, some of the information is coming through now is really good. I think that's one of our key learnings from the first COVID thing. Everything was just too wordy, there was too much. But we're seeing now that messages are actually really simplified. In fact, we had a really good meeting with just through Pegasus Health, a doctor who was really good at with our guys. So we're kind of training the trainers in terms of how to communicate and what are the key questions and that are coming through. Stuff that still missing out on, it's always going to be up for criticism, but visuals, those things, just simple images. But I think understanding the key thing is just and again, this is actually a message we got and we understand well, is understand what were people's feelings, their fears, their anxieties, and unpack those first. I mean, I can think of and again, this is sort of confidential to hopefully this space, but a family we work with who had a real fear.
Hey, Jono, this is not a confidential setting.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
That's right. No, wait. Well, it's not probably, I'll change it then. I'll kind of see. This is a public meeting that is currently being live streamed. So I'll name. Give me 2 seconds. I'll just think about how to phrase it.
Yeah.
So it's not uncommon to find people who are resistant to mandates and bits and pieces, but what it really comes down to is they've had a personal experience where they have been dictated to or told to, and that is the feeling or the fear that drives the resistance as opposed to a vaccine or even a mandate. It's the sense of being powerless, and powerless in an individual sense and in a wider sense in terms of what's happening in the world is something we generally we see. It's a theme that comes up all the time.
Yeah. So Leanne's got a question.
It's kind of an offer with a question, but it's I was really impressed with the work that the Aranui Community Trust did and the Phillipstown Community Hub as well, because they both focused on addressing those issues that you described. So they had education days. They associated the vaccinations with a whānau environment and a whānau fun day in Phillipstown. So the community-led initiatives are the ones that really work. I met an amazing public health doctor that works for the CDHB as part of that process, and I'd like to connect him with you because I think between the two of you and some of the community experiences that you'll be able to get through to all of those people. So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for just opening up people's eyes to the reality of what's going on.
Okay, thanks so much. I think Anne's got a question for Michelle. Marianne, sorry. Yeah. Like, hang on. Sorry. Yeah. That's it.
Hey, thank you for this week and the report, and thanks for both of you for the work that you're doing. In terms of youth and homelessness, it's been highlighted here again, and we know it's a hidden problem. I'm thinking, is in terms of council response, is there anything that we can do with linking up with OCHT and managing that issue?
I'm bound to be.
Well, given that we've heard that that's an issue.
It sounds like quite a big thing that maybe be taken offline, and we can deal with that outside the meeting.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
So I've reached out after hearing the comment and reached out to OCHT and Kate in her role both as CEO of OCHT but also her broader community housing Aotearoa role to see if I can get any background. So I'm waiting for that to come back. But I'll talk more when we come up about some of the stuff that OCHT has done in the vaccination space, because they've done some stuff, and potentially some of the trustees here might be able to comment further on that as well.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. So it looks like we'll be able to do some more connection there and see if we can all work together and help where we can. If there are no further questions, Sam's happy to move receipt of this, and Aaron to second. Sorry, Pauline, just not quite quick enough. The question.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to thank staff for doing this work, but I think, obviously there's been a time lag, so this was September, August. We're now going into a completely different model when Delta hits, where we know the health system will be overwhelmed and the community will be left to deal with the impact. So I just wonder if we can look at doing something similar going forward around the traffic light system, but also the kind of the community care aspects, and just make sure that we can kind of keep updated and provide the support, which I know you guys are already doing.
So this is not our first report of these, and
No,
I'm
it's
assuming
not.
that they'll be ongoing. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
That's right. Okay. Right. If there's any debate, no, I'll put that then. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That's
Thanks,
great.
guys.
Thanks so much, Marianne.
Thank you.
Right. So now we move to the